Hello, my name is Benjamin Osterkamp, and for my practicum, I worked with a hospital in rural central Virginia. There are several issues that come along with healthcare in rural areas. Some of these include how the population in these areas are oftentimes undereducated compared to other regions. Also, the income is often lower than, say, suburban regions. But the main problem with rural healthcare is the distance that's between certain pockets of the population and the nearest piece of healthcare they can reach, like say like a clinic or a hospital or whatnot, or even doctors. Now in Bedford, Virginia, which is where the hospital was at that I worked with Bedford Memorial Hospital. Bedford, Virginia is in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Now Appalachia as a whole have their own unique set of known health disparities. A lot of these include just lack of knowledge on basic nutrition and not being up to date with current healthcare. Also, there are many cultural aspects to Appalachia, which a lot of them include consuming excessive amounts of alcohol and things like that are problems. So these cultural influences definitely influence the region in which we were working. Another issue, like I had mentioned earlier, is the long distance between hospitals and other forms of healthcare and things like that, with these populations being oftentimes off in the mountains or being just physically a long ways away. Geographic issues definitely come into play when it comes to these regions. If you go on to the next slide, we'll talk about what Bedford Memorial Hospital looks at when it comes to their community objectives. Their objectives are fairly simple. It's just to help the overall health of the community in any way possible. A lot of times, these very simple goals are sometimes the most lofty and take the longest amount of time. As a personal objective, I wish to determine different healthcare needs based on what I observed in these different settings within the hospital. Now, the hospital does a lot of community outreach, so it's not all within the hospital itself. They go out and they work with the community, which is something we'll get into later. So between looking at things within the hospital, both administratively and different services they offer in the hospital, as well as the outreach opportunities they have, there's a lot of different things this community hospital is doing to help out the community as a whole. One of these was actually doing children's education. When you move on to the next slide, one of the first things that I worked with personally was a kids camp on healthcare careers. Now, what this camp was focused on is taking kids from the community during the summer, so they're not in regular school. They have more time on their hands, so what they will do is they'll come to the hospital, and these different people within the hospital will train them on different careers that they can get into in healthcare. I know a lot of times these kids were elementary school age. A lot of times kids that age think just, oh, doctors are healthcare, but there's so much more to healthcare than just doctors, and that's what they tried to explain to these kids. They explored nursing and physical therapy, emergency workers like ambulances and EMS. They even got a chance to tour a emergency medevac helicopter. They thought that was really, really cool. They even got to do a little bit of surgery prep, and they even got to do some surgery on a chicken breast that they brought in. So it was a lot of fun for these kids. They got to learn a lot about different healthcare careers, and I was able to just observe some of the training that went on when it came to them teaching these kids how to use different aspects of public health and things like that. And that was really neat to see how this education of the public is coming into play, not only for adults but also for children. Moving on to the next slide, one of the other events that we worked with was there was actually a local wine festival at a local winery called the Horse and Hound Festival. One thing that we did here was it was education based, but we set up a booth at this festival along with a lot of other vendors, and we promoted sobriety and proper hydration and designated driving. Now, one thing I mentioned earlier is about how a lot of times these Appalachian communities don't know how to properly consume alcohol in the right ways. So that was one thing we were trying to promote is, okay, if you're going to consume alcohol, you need to stay hydrated. Also, sobriety is obviously a major thing. You don't want to get drunk. And if you do plan on drinking, you need to make sure you have a designated driver so you can get home safely. Now, that was really good because the festival supplied designated driver wristbands so people would know who could and couldn't drink the different samples that the wineries had to offer and things like that. But we were able to pass out a lot of water and just help verbally educate a lot of the public on these different areas that may be of concern. Another area that involved children that we're going to look at on the next slide was a kids' safety fair that went on. Now, this was hosted by a local State Farm agent, actually, and it was held at his office and out in the land and the parking lot surrounding his office. And a lot of other local vendors came out to this event as well. The hospital that I was part of came out to this event, and I helped man that booth, but also the Humane Society came out, the Boy Scouts, the national parks, the local police department was there. So a lot of different people from the community came out to this kids festival to help educate kids on things that are going on in the community and different things they can do. Now, at the hospital booth where I was at, we focused a lot on children's safety when it comes to, we had a leaflet that was about kids being safe on wheels. And what it talked a lot about is how to keep kids safe when they're on their bicycles, things like wearing helmets, wearing wrist guards, elbow pads, things like that, and why kids don't like to wear helmets. The number one reason kids don't like to wear helmets is because they think that all their friends will think it's not cool. So it's really interesting to see how it's simply just social perspective on things like wearing a helmet, which is often considered the most essential piece of protective equipment when it comes to riding on bikes or scooters or anything like that. Another thing that we focused on, we had leaflets on, was keeping medications safe from kids. A lot of times parents will keep medications on the table or on counters, and one of the worst things is that if a child is given a prescription because of an illness, parents will oftentimes keep it on a table or a counter for easy access, and the child will know that's my prescription, which it is, and then sometimes kids will think, well, it's okay for me to take some of those because they're mine, and they'll take more than the prescribed amount and run into a lot of problems. So just educating parents and children on different aspects of safety for kids was a really great way to impact the community. Now, I didn't always work outside of the hospital. We did a lot of things inside the hospital as well. So moving on to the next slide, we'd like to focus on my work in the emergency room. Now, one of the things I got to do was I was able to monitor the emergency room and help out patients with any questions they had, and also help them getting in and out of the hospital effectively, things like with wheelchairs from the parking lot and whatnot. Being able to observe how an emergency room works in these rural areas was very interesting, because you have a lot of people, like I had mentioned before, rural areas, they're traveling a long distance to come in here, and you get all different types of people coming into the emergency room. You have people with all different types of injuries and illnesses and all different temperaments. It was really great to see how that works in this rural area where you have to work with all different kinds of people and all different demographics. Now, inside the hospital as well, not just in the ER, I also got to attend a lot of administrative meetings on how to properly conduct hospital business. The hospital is actually currently in the middle of renovating their emergency room, and I believe one of the pictures there is what an artist representation of what the future emergency room entrance would look like. Now, going to different meetings on construction and making sure they're staying up to date on all their plans and everything was very interesting to see how healthcare isn't always just about medicine and doctors and healthcare, but it's also taking care of the building and making sure you're up to date on technology and things like that. So it was really cool, and something that I just hadn't realized fully, that it's not always just about medicine and doctors, but there's a lot of other aspects to healthcare, especially in a hospital setting as well. Now, moving on to the next slide, there are some problem areas when looking at the community as a whole of Bedford that may need to be addressed. There are some statistics showing that some of the main problem areas in Bedford are obesity is on the rise, people are generally not very physically active, and also alcohol abuse has pretty much flatlined despite a lot of efforts that have gone on to try to decrease this. Now, some of these can be culturally based, like I mentioned, the alcohol abuse with the people in the Appalachian foothills. There's even a popular TV show called Moonshiners that is set in this very area. So alcohol is definitely something that we need to work on. But this can be very hard because it is part of the culture of the area. Now, some of the ways we could potentially correct this as we look at the next slide. To influence these areas, when it comes to physical activities, we can promote activities in local parks. One of the things I was able to do is we had a kids movie night in a park. So doing things like that, you're able to get kids in parks, get them familiar with these areas so they can know, hey, I went to the park, I had fun, we can go there again, we can play outside, and have fun with that. Another thing is promoting city sports. These can be both youth sports or adult sports. Doing these sports can help out with two ways. They can help increase physical activity, and also with this increased physical activity, it will help out with the obesity problem. And also, when it comes to the alcohol issue, like I had mentioned, this is something that's a lot of efforts have been done to try to decrease this. A lot of things just don't seem to be working. But just promoting education of responsible alcohol consumption is probably the best route in doing this. Maybe doing advertising campaigns or whatnot. But a lot of times, the sad thing is that once people get embedded in a way of life, it's very, very difficult to get them to change. So, in conclusion, just the practicum experience was very good. I learned a lot, and I got to know a lot of different aspects of public health, but also just being able to analyze a community and see what all they need to do to improve and help out was very beneficial as well. And I learned a lot, and I'm very glad I was able to work with the Bedford Memorial Hospital. Thank you very much for your time.